The Allfather's forebodings. How he left Asgard. Two ravens had Odin Allfather. Hugin and Mjolnir were their names. They flew through all the worlds every day. Coming back to Asgard, they would light on Odin's shoulder, tell him of all the things they had seen and heard. And once a day passed without the ravens coming back. Then Odin, standing on the watchtower, said to himself, I fear me for Hugin, lest he come not back, but I watch more for Munin. A day passed, and the ravens flew back. They sat one on each of his shoulders. Then did the Allfather go into the council hall that was beside the glacier. The wood that had leaves of gold. And hearkened to what Hugin and Munin had to tell him. They told him only of shadows and forebodings. Odin Allfather did not speak to the dwellers in Asgard of the things they told him, but Frigga, his queen, saw in his eyes the shadows and forebodings of things to come. And when he spoke to her about these things, she said, Do not strive against what must take place. Let us go to the holy Norns who sit beside Earth as well, and see if the shadows and the forebodings will remain when you have looked into their eyes. And so it came that Odin and the gods left Asgard and came to Earth as well, where under the great root Yggdrasil, the three Norns sat, with the two fair swans below them. Odin went, and Tyr, the great swordsman, and Balder, the most beautiful and best beloved of the gods, and Thor with his hammer. A rainbow bridge went from Asgard, the city of the gods, to Midgard, the world of men. But another rainbow bridge, more beautiful and more tremulous still, went from Asgard to that root of Yggdrasil, under which was Urda's well. This rainbow bridge was seldom seen by men, and where the ends of the two rainbows came together, Heimdall stood. Heimdall, with the golden teeth, the watcher for the gods, and the keeper of the way to Urda's well. Open the gate, Heimdall, said the Allfather. Open the gate, for today the gods would visit the holy Norns. Without a word, Heimdall opened wide the gate that led to that bridge, more colored and more tremulous than any rainbow seen from earth. Then did Odin and Tyr and Balder step out onto the bridge. Thor followed, but before his foot was placed on the bridge, Heimdall laid a hand upon him. The others may go, but you may not go that way, Thor, said Heimdall. What? Would you, Heimdall, hold me back? Said Thor. Yes, for I am keeper of the way to the Norns, said Heimdall. You, with the mighty hammer you carry, are too weighty for this way. The bridge I guard would break under you, Thor, with this hammer. Nevertheless, I will go visit the Norns with Odin and my comrades, said Thor. But not this way, Thor, said Heimdall. I will not let the bridge be broken under the weight of you and your hammer. Leave your hammer here with me if you would go this way." "No, no," said Thor. "I will not leave in anyone's charge the hammer that defends Asgard, and I may not be turned back from going with Odin and my comrades." "There is another way to it as well," said Heimdall. "Behold these two great cloud rivers, Ormt and Irmst. Canst thou wade through them? They are cold and suffocating, but they will bring thee to Odin as well, where sit the three holy Norns." Thor looked out on the great rolling rivers of clouds. It was a bad way for one to go, cold and suffocating. Yet if he went that way, he could keep on his shoulder the hammer which he would not leave in another's charge. He stepped out into the cloud river and flowed by the rainbow bridge, and with his hammer upon his shoulder he went, struggling on to the other river. Odin, Tyr, and Balder were besideward as well when Thor came struggling out of the cloud river, wet and choking, but with his hammer still upon his shoulder. There stood Tyr, upright and handsome, leaning on his sword that was inscribed all over with magic runes. There stood Balder, smiling, with his head bent as he listened to the murmur of the two fair swans. And there stood Odin All-Father, clad in his blue cloak fringed with golden stars, without the eagle helmet upon his head, and with no spear in his hands. The three Norns, Orda, Verdandi, and Skulda, sat beside the well that was in the hollow of the great root of Yggdrasil. Urda was ancient, and with white hair, and Verdandi was beautiful, while Skulda could hardly be seen, for she sat way far back, and her hair fell over her face and eyes. Urda, Verdandi, and Skulda, they knew the whole of the past, the whole of the present, and the whole of the future. Odin, looking on them, saw into the eyes of Skulda even. Long, long he stood, looking on the Norns with the eyes of a god, while the others listened to the murmur of the swans and the falling of the leaves of Yggdrasil into Urda's well. Looking into their eyes, Odin saw the shadows and forebodings that Hugin and Munin had told him of taking shape and substance. And now others came across the rainbow bridge. They were Frigga and Sif and Nanna, the wives of Odin and Thor and Balder. Frigga looked upon the Norns. As she did, she turned a glance of love and sadness upon Balder, her son, and then she drew back and placed her hand upon Nanna's head. Odin turned from gazing on the Norns and looked upon Frigga, his queenly wife. "I would leave Asgard for a while, wife of Odin," he said. "Yea," said Frigga, "much has to be done in Midgard, the world of men." "I would change what knowledge I have into wisdom," said Odin, "so that the things that are to happen will be changed into the best that may be." "You would go to Mimir's well, said Frigga. I would go to Mimir's well, agreed Odin. My husband, go, said Frigga. Then they went back over that rainbow bridge that is more beautiful and more tremulous than the one that men see from the earth. They went back over the rainbow bridge, the Aesir and the Aesirnir, Odin and Frigga, Balder and Nanna, Tyr with his sword, and Sif beside Tyr. As for Thor, he went struggling through the cloud rivers Kormt and Ermst, his hammer Mjolnir upon his shoulder. Little Hnossa, the youngest of the dwellers in Asgard, was there, standing beside Heimdall, the watcher for the gods and the keeper of the bridge to Urda's well, when Odin Allfather and Frigga his queen went through the great gate with heads bent. Tomorrow, Hnossa heard Odin say, tomorrow shall be Bedtime, the wanderer, upon the ways of Midgard on Jotunheim. Part 2. Odin the Wanderer. Odin goes to Mimir's well, his sacrifice for wisdom. And so Odin, no longer riding on Sleipnir, his 8-legged steed, no longer wearing his golden armor and his eagle helmet, and without even his spear in his hand, traveled through Midgard, the world of men, and made his way toward Jotunheim, the realm of giants. No longer was he called Odin Allfather, but Bedtime the Wanderer. He wore a cloak of dark blue, and he carried a traveler's staff in his hands. And now, as he went toward Mimir's well, which was near to Jotunheim, he came upon a giant riding on a great stag. Odin seemed a man to men and a giant to giants. He went beside the giant on the great stag, and the two talked together. Who art thou, O brother? Odin asked the giant. I am Vafthrûdnr, the wisest of the giants, said the one who was riding on the stag. Odin knew him then. Vafthrûdnr was indeed the wisest of the giants, and many went to strive to gain wisdom from him. But those who went to him had to answer the riddles Vafthrûdnr asked, and if they failed to answer, the giant took their heads off. I am Bedtime the Wanderer, said Odin, and I know who thou art, O Vafthrûdnr. I would strive to learn something from thee. The giant laughed, showing his teeth. Oh, he said, I'm ready for a game with thee. Dost thou know the stakes? My head to thee if I cannot answer any question thou wilt ask. And if thou canst not answer any questions that I may ask, then thy head goes to me. And now let us begin. I am ready, Odin said. Then tell me, said Vafthrûdnr, tell me the name of the river that divides Asgard from Jotunheim. Ifling is the name of that river, said Odin. Ifling that is dead cold, yet never frozen. Thou hast answered rightly, O wanderer, said the giant, but thou hast still to answer other questions. What are the names of the horses that day and night drive across the sky? Skinfax and Hrimfax, Odin answered. Vafthrudner was startled to hear one say the names that were known only to the gods and to the wisest of giants. There was only one question now that he might ask before it came to the stranger's turn to ask him questions. Tell me, said Vafthrudner, what is the name of the plain on which the last battle will be fought? The plain of Vigard, said Odin, the plain that is 100 miles long and 100 miles across. It was now Odin's turn to ask Vafthrudner questions. What will be the last words that Odin will whisper into the ear of Balder, his dearest son? He asked. Very startled was the giant Vafthrudner at this question. He sprang to the ground and looked at the stranger keenly. Only Odin knows what his last words to Balder will be, he said, and only Odin would have asked that question. Thou art Odin, O wanderer, and thy question I cannot answer. Then, said Odin, if thou wouldst keep thy head, answer me this. What price will Mimir ask for a draught from the well of wisdom that he guards? He will ask thy right eye as a price, O Odin, said Vafthrudner. Will he ask no less a price than that? Asked Odin. Nay, he will ask no less a price. Many have come to him for a draught from the well of wisdom, but no one yet has given the price Mimir asks. I have answered thy question, O Odin. Now give up thy claim to my head, and let me go on my way. I give up my claim to thy head, said Odin. Then Vafthrudner, the wisest of giants, went on his way, riding on his great stag. Let's get back to it. It was a terrible price that Mimir would ask for a draught from the well of wisdom, and very troubled was Odin All-Father when it was revealed to him. His right eye, for all time to be without the sight of his right eye. Almost he would have turned back to Asgard, giving up on his quest for wisdom. He went on, turning neither to Asgard nor to Mimir's well. And when he went to the south, he saw Muspelheim, where stood Surtur, with the flaming sword, a terrible figure who would one day join the giants in their war against the gods. And when he turned north, he heard the roaring of the cauldron of Hvergelmir as it poured itself out of Niflheim, the place of darkness and dread. And Odin knew that the world must not be left between Surtur, who would destroy it with fire, and Niflheim, that would gather it back to darkness and nothingness. He, the eldest of the gods, would have to win the wisdom that would help to save the world. And so, with his face stern in front of his loss of pain, Odin All-Father turned and went towards Mimir's well. It was under the great root of Yggdrasil, the root that grew out of Jotunheim. And there sat Mimir, the guardian of the well of wisdom, with his deep eyes bent upon the deep water. And Mimir, who had drunk every day from the well of wisdom, knew who stood before him. "Hail, Odin, eldest of the gods," he said. Then Odin made reverence to Mimir, the wisest of the world's beings. "I would drink from your well, Mimir," he said. "There is a price to be paid. All who have come here to drink have shrunk from paying that price. Will you, eldest of the gods, pay it?" "I will not shrink from the price that has to be paid, Mimir," said Odin All-Father. "Then drink deep," said Mimir. He filled up a great horn with water from the well and gave it to Odin. Odin took the horn in both his hands and drank, and as he drank, all the future became clear to him. He saw all the sorrows and troubles that would fall upon men and gods, but he saw too why the sorrows and troubles had to fall, and he saw how they might be borne so that gods and men, by being noble in the days of sorrow and trouble, would leave in the world a force that one day, a day that was far off indeed, would destroy the evil that brought terror and sorrow and despair into the world. Then, when he had drunk out of the great horn that Mimir had given him, he put his hand to his face, and he plucked out his right eye. Terrible was the pain that Odin All-Father endured, but he made no groans nor moans. He bowed his head and put his cloak before his face as Mimir took the eye and let it sink deep into the water of the well of wisdom. And there the eye of Odin stayed, shining up through the water, a sign to all who came to that place of the price that the Father of the gods had paid for his wisdom. Odin faces an evil man. Once, when his wisdom was less great, Odin had lived in the world of men. Always, Odin and Frigga were watching over the sons of men. Watching to know which ones they would foster and train so that they might have the strength and spirit to save the world from the power of the giants. And while they were staying on the bleak island, Odin and Frigga saw the sons of King Hrodding, and both thought that in them the spirit of heroes could be fostered. Sorry, just a moment. sorry about that. He is a little turd all by himself. Odin and Frigga made plans to bring the children to them, so that they might be under their care and training. One day, the boys went fishing. A storm came, then drove their boat on the rocks of the island where Odin and Frigga lived. They brought them to their hut, Odin and Frigga, and they told them they would care for them and train them through the winter, and that in the spring they would build a boat that would carry them back to their father's country. "We shall see," said Odin to Frigga that night. "We shall see which of those two can be formed into the noblest hero." He said that because Frigga favored one of the boys, and he favored the other. Frigga thought well of the elder boy, Agnar, who had a gentle voice and a quiet and kindly way. But Odin thought more of the younger boy, Jared. His name was, and he was strong and passionate, with a high and loud voice. Odin took Jared into his charge, and he showed him how to fish and hunt. He made the boy even bolder than he was by making him leap from rock to rock, and by letting him climb the highest cliffs and jump across the widest chasms. He would bring him to the den of the bear and make him fight for his life with the spear he had made for him. Agnar went to the chase too, and showed his skill and boldness, but Jared overcame him in nearly every trial. "What a hero Jared will be," Odin would often say. Agnar stayed often with Frigga. He would stay beside her while she spun, listening to the tales that she told, and asking such questions as brought him more and more wisdom. And Agnar heard of Asgard and of the dwellers in Asgard, and how they protected Midgard, the world of men, from the giants of Jotunheim. Agnar, though he did not speak out, said in his own mind that he would give all his life and all his strength and all his thought to helping the work of the gods. Spring came, and Odin built a boat for Jared and Agnar. They could go back now to their own country. And before they set out, Odin told Jared that one day he would come to visit him. "And do not be too proud to receive a fisherman in your hall, Jared," said Odin. "A king should give him welcome to the poorest who comes to his halls." "I will be a hero, no doubt of that," Jared answered, "and I will be a king too. Only Agnar Littlegood was born before me." Agnar bade goodbye to Frigga and to Odin, thanking them for the care they had brought of Jared and himself. he looked into Frigga's eyes, and he told her that he would strive to learn how he might fight the battle for the gods. The two went into the boat, and they rowed away. They came near to King Hruding's realm. They saw the castle overlooking the sea. Then Jared did a terrible thing. He turned the boat back toward the sea, and he cast the oars away. Then, for he was well fit to swim the roughest seas and climb the highest cliffs, he plunged into the water and struck out towards the shore, and Agnar, left without oars, went adrift out to sea. Jared climbed the high cliffs and came into his father's castle. King Hruding, who had given up both of his sons for dead, was rejoiced to see him. Jared told of Agnar that he had fallen out of the boat on their way back, and that he had been drowned. King Hruding, who had thought both of his sons were gone from him, was glad enough that one had come home safe. He put Jared beside him on the throne, and when he died, Jared was made king over the people. And now Odin, having drunk from Mimir's well, went through the kingdoms of men, judging the kings and simple people according to the wisdom that he had gained. He came at last to the kingdom that Jared ruled over. Odin thought that of all the kings he had judged to be noble, Jared would assuredly be the noblest. He went to the king's house as a wanderer, blind of one eye, wearing a cloak of dark blue, and with a wanderer's staff in his hands. As he drew near the king's house, men on dark horses came riding behind him. The first of the men did not turn his horse as he came near the wanderer, but rode on, nearly trampling him to the ground. And we'll take a break real quick and be right back. As they came before the king's house, the men on the dark horses shouted for servants. Only one servant was in the stable. He came out and took the horse of the first man. Then the other called upon the wanderer to tend their horses. He had to hold the stirrups for some of them to dismount. Odin knew who the first man was. He was Jared the king, and he knew who the man who served in the stables was. He was Agnar, Jared's brother. By the wisdom he had gained, he knew that Agnar had come back to his father's kingdom in the guise of a servant, and he knew that Jared did not know who this servant was. They went into the stable together. Agnar took bread and broke it, and gave some to the wanderer. He gave him too straw to seat himself on. But in a while Odin said, I would seat myself at the fire in the king's hall, and eat my supper of meat. Nay, stay here, Agnar said. I will give you more bread and a wrap to cover yourself with. Do not go to the door of the king's house, for the king is angry today, and he might repulse you. How? Said Odin. A king turn away a wanderer who comes to his door, it cannot be that he would do it. Today he is angry, Agnar said. Again he begged him not to go to the door of the king's house. But Odin rose up from the straw on which he was seated and went to the door. A porter, hunchbacked and with long arms, stood at the door. I am a wanderer, and I would have rest and food in the king's hall, said Odin. Not in the king's hall, said the hunchback porter. He would have barred the door to Odin, but the voice of the king called him away. Odin then strode into the hall and saw the king at the table with his friends, all dark-bearded and cruel-looking men. And when Odin looked on them, he knew that the boy whom he had trained in nobility had become a king over robbers. Since you have come into the hall where we eat, sing to us, wanderer, shouted one of the dark men. Ay, I will sing to you, said Odin. Then he stood between two of the stone pillars in the hall, and he sang a song reproaching the king for having fallen into an evil way of life and denouncing all for following the cruel ways of robbers. Seize him, said the king, when Odin's song was finished. The dark men threw themselves upon Odin and put chains around him and bound him between the stone pillars of the hall. He came into this hall for warmth, and warmth he shall have, said Jared. He called upon his servants to heap up wood around him. They did so. Then the king, with his own hand, put a blazing torch into the wood, and the logs blazed up around the wanderer. These logs burned round and round, but the fire did not burn the flesh of Odin Allfather. The king and the king's men stood around, watching with delight the fire blazing around a living man. Once the logs all burned away, and Odin was left standing there with his terrible gaze fixed upon the men who were so hard and cruel. They went to sleep, leaving him chained to the pillars of the hall. Odin could have broken the chains and pulled down the pillars, but he wanted to see what else would happen in this king's house. The servants were ordered not to bring him food or drink, but at dawn, when there was no one near, Agnar came to him with a horn of ale and gave it to him to drink. Sorry. The next evening, when the king came back from his robberies, and when he and his friends, sitting down at the tables, had eaten like wolves, he ordered new logs to be placed around Odin. And again they stood around and watched in delight as the fire played around a living man. And as before, Odin stood there unhurt by the fire, and his steady and terrible gaze made the king hate him more and more. And all day he was kept in chains, and the servants were yet still forbidden to bring him food or drink. None knew that a horn of ale was brought to him at dawn. And night after night, for 8 nights, this continued. Then on the 9th night, when the fires around him had been lit, Odin lifted up his voice and began to sing a song. His song became louder and louder, and the king and his friends and the servants of the thing's house had to stand still and hearken to it. Odin sang about Jared the king, how the gods had protected him, giving him strength and skill, and how instead of making a noble use of that strength and skill, he had made himself like one of the wild beasts. Then he sang of how the vengeance of the gods was about to fall on this ignoble man. The flames died down, and Jared and his friends saw before them not a friendless wanderer, but one who looked more kingly than any king on earth. The chains fell down from around his body, and he advanced towards the evil company. Then Jared rushed upon him with his sword in hand to kill him. The sword struck him, but Odin remained unhurt. Thy life runs out. The gods, they are wroth with thee. Draw near if thou canst. Odin thou shalt see. So Odin sang, and, in fear of his terrible gaze, Jared and his company shrank away. And as they shrank away, they were changed into beasts, into the wolves that range the forest. And Agnar came forward, and him Odin declared as king. All the folk were glad when Agnar came to rule over them, for they had been oppressed by Jared in his cruel reign. And Agnar was not only kind, but he was strong and victorious in his rule. Odin wins for men the magic mead. It was dwarfs who brewed the magic mead, and it was the giants who hid it away, but it was Odin who brought it from the place where it was hidden and gave it to the sons of men. Those who drank of the magic mead became very wise, and not only that, but they could put their wisdom into such beautiful words that everyone who heard would love and remember it. The dwarfs brewed the magic mead through cruelty and villainy. They made it out of the blood of a man. That man was Kvasir the poet. He had wisdom, and he had such beautiful words with it, that what he said was loved and remembered by all. The dwarfs brought Kvasir down into their caverns, and they killed him there. Now, they said, we have Kvasir's blood and Kvasir's wisdom. No one else will have his wisdom but us. They poured the blood into 3 jars, and they mixed it with honey, and from it they brewed the magic mead. Having killed a man, the dwarfs became more and more bold. They came out of their caverns and went up and down through Midgard, the world of men. They went into Jotunheim and began to play their evil tricks on the most harmless of the giants. They came upon one giant who was very simple. Gilling was his name. They persuaded Gilling to row them out to sea in a boat. Then the 2 most cunning of the dwarfs, Elar and Velar, steered the boat onto a rock. The boat split. Gilling, who could not swim, was drowned. The dwarfs clambered up on pieces of the boat and came safely ashore. They were so delighted with their evil tricks that they wanted to play some more of them. Elar and Pilar then went, then thought of a new piece of mischief they might do. They led their band of dwarfs to Gilling's house and screamed out to his wife that Gilling was dead. The giant's wife began to weep and lament. At last she rushed out of the house, weeping and clapping her hands. Now Kellar and Vilar had clambered up on the lintel of the house, and as she came running out, they cast a millstone on her head. It struck her, and Gilling's wife fell down dead. More and more the dwarves were delighted at the destruction they were making. They were so insolent now that they made up songs and sang them, songs that were all a boast of how they had killed Kvasir the poet, and Gilling the giant, and Gilling's wife. They stayed around Jotunheim, tormenting all whom they were able to torment, and flattering themselves that they were great and strong. They stayed too long, however. Suttung, Gilling's brother, tracked them down and captured them. Suttung was not harmless and simple like Gilling, his brother. He was cunning, and he was covetous. Once they were in his hands, the dwarves had no choice of making a mistake and escape. He took them and left them on a rock in the sea, a rock that the tide would cover. The giants stood up in the water, taller than the rock, and the tide, as it came in, did not rise above his knee. He stood there watching the dwarfs as the water rose up around them, and they became more and more terrified. "Oh, please take us off the rock, good Suttung," they cried out to him. "Take us off the rock, and we will give you gold and jewels. Take us off this rock, and we will give you a necklace as beautiful as Persicamen." So they cried out to him, but the giant Suttung only laughed at them. He had no need of gold or jewels. Then Vilar and Galar cried out, "Take us off the rock, and we will give you the jars of the magic mead that we have brewed." "The magic mead," said Suttung. "This is something that no one else has. It will be well to get it, for it might help us in the battle against the gods. Yes, I will get the magic mead from them." He took the band of dwarves off the rock, but he held Galar and Vilar, their chiefs, while the others went into their caverns and brought up the jars of magic mead. Suttung took the mead and brought it to a cavern in a mountain near his dwelling, and thus it happened that the magic mead, brewed by the dwarves through cruelty and villainy, came into the hands of the giants, and the story now tells how Odin, the eldest of the gods, at that time in the world as Bedtime the Wanderer, took the magic mead out of Suttung's possession and brought it into the world of men. Now, Suttung had a daughter named Glunlod, and she, by her goodness and her beauty, was like Gerda and Skadi, the giant maids whom the dwellers in Asgard favored. Suttung, that he might have a guardian for the magic mead, enchanted Gunlod, turning her from a beautiful giant maiden into a witch with long teeth and sharp nails. He shut her into the cavern where the jars of magic mead were hidden. Odin heard of the death of Kvasir, whom he honored above all men. The dwarves who slew him he had closed up in their cavern so that they were never again able to come out into the world of men. And then he set out to get that magic mead, that he might give it to men, so that, after tasting it, they would have wisdom, and words would be at their command, that would make wisdom loved and remembered. How Odin won the magic mead out of the rock-covered cavern where Suttung had hid it, and how he broke the enchantment that lay upon his daughter, Glenod, is a story often told around the hearths of men. 9 strong thralls were mowing in a field as a wanderer went by, clad in a dark blue cloak and carrying a wanderer's staff in his hand. One of the thralls spoke to the wanderer. "Tell them in the house of Baugi up yonder that I can mow no more until a whetstone to sharpen my scythe is sent to me." "Here is a whetstone," said the wanderer, and he took one from his belt. The thrall who had spoken whetted his scythe with it and began to mow. The grass went down before his scythe as if the wind had cut it. "Give us the whetstone! Give us the whetstone!" cried the other thralls. The wanderer threw the whetstone among them, leaving them quarreling over it, and went on his way. The wanderer came to the house of Baugi, the brother of Suttung. He rested in Baugi's house, and at supper time he was given food at the great table. And while he was eating with the giant, a messenger from the field came in. "Baugi," said the messenger, "your 9 thralls are all dead. They killed each other with their scythes, fighting in the fields about a whetstone. There are no thralls now to do your work." "What shall I do? What shall I do?" said Baugi the giant. "My fields will not be mown now, and I shall have no hay to feed my cattle and my horses in the winter." "I might work for you," said the wanderer. "One man's work is no use to me," said the giant. "I must have the work of 9 men." "I shall do the work of 9 men," said the wanderer. "Give me a trial and see." The next day, Bedtime the wanderer went into Baugi's field. He did as much work as the 9 thralls had done in a single day. "Stay with me for a season," said Baugi, "and I shall give you a full reward." So Bedtime stayed at the giant's house and worked in the giant's fields, and when all the work of the season was done, Baugi said to him, "Speak now and tell me what reward I am giving you." "The only reward I shall ask of you," said Bedtime, "is a trot." "The magic mead," said Baugi. "I do not know where it is nor how to get it. Your brother Suttung has it." Baugi went to Suttung, but when he heard what he had come for, the giant Suttung turned on his brother in a rage. "A draught of the magic mead?" he questioned. "To no one will I give a draught of the magic mead. Have I not enchanted my daughter Gudlod, so that she may watch over it? And you tell me that a wanderer who has done the work of 9 men for you asks for a draught of magic mead for his fee. O giant as foolish as Gilling, O oaf of a giant! Who could have done such work for you, and who would demand such a fee from you, but one of our enemies, the Aesir? Go from me now, and never come to me again with talk of the magic mead. Baugi went back to his house, and told the wanderer that stone would yield none of the magic mead. I hold you to your bargain, said Victim the Wanderer, and you will have to get me the fee I asked. Come with me now and help me to get it. He made Baugi bring him to the place where the magic mead was hidden. The place was a cavern in the mountains. In front of that cavern was a great mass of stone. We cannot move that stone, nor get through it, said Baugi. I cannot help you for your fee. The wanderer drew an auger from his belt. This will bore through the rock if there is strength behind it. You have strength, giant. Begin now and bore. Baugi took the auger in his hands and bored with it all his strength, and the wanderer stood by, leaning on his staff, calm and majestic in his cloak of blue. I have made a deep, deep hole. It goes through the rock, Baugi said at last. The wanderer went to the hole and blew into it. The dust of the rock flew back into their faces. So that is your boasted strength, giant, he said. You have not bored halfway through the rock. Work again. Then Baugi took the auger once more, and he bored deeper and deeper into the rock. And he blew into it, and lo, his breath went through. Then he looked at the wanderer to see what he would do. His eyes had become fierce, and he held the auger in his hand as if it were a stabbing knife. Look up to the head of the rock, said the wanderer. As Baugi looked up, the wanderer changed himself into a snake and glided into the hole in the rock, and Baugi struck at him with the auger, hoping to kill him, but the snake slipped past. Behind the mighty rock, there was a hollow place, all lightened up by the shining crystals that existed within the stone. And within the hollow place there was an ill-looking witch with long teeth and sharp nails. But she sat there rocking herself and letting tears fall from her eyes. Oh, youth and beauty, she sang. Oh, sight of men and women, sad, sad for me is it that you are shut away, and that I have only this closed in cavern, and this horrible form. The snake glided across the floor. Oh, that you were deadly, and that you might slay me, cried the witch. The snake glided past her. Then she heard a voice speak softly. Glunlod, Glunlod. She looked around, and there, standing behind her, was a majestic man, clad in a cloak of dark blue. Odin, the eldest of the gods. You have come to take the magic mead that my father has set me here to guard, she cried. You shall not have it. Rather shall I spill it out on the thirsty earth of this cavern. Good Lord, he said. And he came to her. She looked at him and she felt the red blood of youth come back into her cheeks. She put her hands with their sharp nails over her breast, and she felt the nails drive into her flesh. Save me from this ugliness, she cried. I will save you, Odin said. He went to her. He took her hands and held them. He kissed her on the mouth. All the marks of ill favor went from her. All the marks of ill favor went from her. She was no longer bent, but tall and shapely. Her eyes became wide and deep blue. Her mouth became red and her hands soft and beautiful. She became as fair as Gerda, the giant maid whom Frey had wed. They stayed looking at each other. Then they sat down side by side and talked softly to each other. Odin, the eldest of the gods, and Gudlod, the beautiful giant maiden. She gave him the 3 jars of the magic mead, and she told him she would go out of the cavern with him. 3 days passed, and still they were together. Then Odin, by his wisdom, found hidden paths and passages that led out of the cavern, and he brought Gudlod out into the light of the day. And he brought with him the jars of the magic mead, the mead whose taste gives wisdom, and wisdom in such beautiful words that all love and remember it. And Gudlod, who had tasted a little of the magic mead, wandered through the world, singing of the beauty and the might of Odin and of her love of him. Odin tells to Vidar, his silent son, the secret of his doings. It was not only to giants and men that Odin showed himself in the days. When he went through Jotunheim and Midgard as Vegtam, the Wanderer. He met and he spoke with the gods also, with one who lived far away from Asgard, and with others who came to Midgard and to Jotunheim. The one who lived far away from Asgard was Vidar, Odin's silent son. Far within the wilderness, with branches and tall grass growing around him, Vidar sat, and near him a horse grazed with a saddle upon it, a horse that was ever ready for a speedy journey. And now Odin, as Vegtam the Wanderer, came into that silent place and spoke to Vidar, the silent god. "O Vidar," he said, "strangest of all my sons, God who will live when all of us has passed away, God who will bring the memory of the dwellers of Asgard into a world that will know not their power. O Vidar, well do I know why there grazes nearby three horses, ever ready for the speedy journey. It is that thou mayest spring upon it and ride unchecked, thy son speeding to avenge his father. To you only, O Vidar, the silent one, will I speak of the secrets of my doings. Who but you can know why I, Odin, the eldest of the gods, hung on the tree Yggdrasil 9 days and 9 nights, my own spear transfixing me. I hung upon that windy tree that I might learn the wisdom that would give me power in the 9 worlds. On the 9th night, the runes of wisdom appeared before my eyes, and slipping down from the tree, I took them to myself, and I shall tell why my ravens fly today, carrying in their beaks scraps of leather. It is that thou mayst make for thyself a sandal. With that sandal on, thou mayst put thy foot on the lower jaw of a mighty wolf and rend him. All the shoemakers of the earth throw on the ground scraps of leather they use so that thou mayst be able to make the sandal for thy wolf-rending foot. And I have counseled the dwellers on earth to cut off the fingernails and toenails of their dead, lest from those fingernails and toenails the giants make for themselves the ship Naglvar, in which they will sail from the north on the day of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. More, Vidar, I will tell to thee. I, living among men, have wed the daughter of a hero. My son shall live as a mortal among mortals. Siggi his name shall be. From him shall spring heroes who will fill Valhalla, my own hall in Asgard, with heroes against the day of our strife with the giants, and with Surtur of the flaming sword. For long Odin stayed in that silent place, communing with his silent son, with Vidar, who with his brother would live beyond the lives of the dwellers of Asgard, and who would bring into another day and another world the memory of the Aesir and the Vanir. For long Odin spoke with him, and then he went across the wilderness where the grass and the brush grew, and where the horse grazed in readiness for the sudden journey. He went toward the seashore where the Aesir and the Vanir were now gathered for the feast that old Aegir, the giant king of the sea, had offered them. Thor and Loki in the giant city. All but a few of the dwellers of Asgard had come to feast offered by Aegir the Old, the giant king of the sea. Frigga, the queenly wife of Odin, was there, and Frey and Freya. Iduna, who guarded the apples of youth, and Bragi, her husband. Tyr, the great swordsman, and Njord, the god of the sea. Skadi, who wedded Njord, and whose hatred for Loki was fierce, and Sif, whose golden hair was once shorn off by Loki the mischievous. Thor and Loki were there. The dwellers of Asgard gathered together in the hall of Aegir, waited for Odin. Before Odin came, Loki made the company merry by the tales that he told in mockery of Thor. Loki long since had his lips unloosened from the thong that the dwarf Brock had sewn them with, and Thor had forgotten the wrong that he had done to Sif. Loki had been with Thor in his wanderings through Jotunheim, and about these wanderings he now told mocking tales. He told how he had seen Thor in his chariot of brass, drawn by 2 goats, go across the Bifrost, the bow bridge. None of the Aesir or the Vanir knew on what adventures Thor was bent, but Loki followed him, and Thor kept him in his company. As they traveled on in the brass chariot drawn by the two goats, Thor told Loki of the adventure on which he was bent. He would go into Jotunheim, even into Utgard, the giant's city, and he would try his strength against the giants. He was not afraid of aught that might happen, for he carried Mjolnir, his hammer, with him. Their way was through Midgard, the world of men. Once, as they were traveling on, night came upon them as they were hungry and in need of shelter. They saw a peasant hut, and they drove the chariot toward it. Unyoken goats, and leaving them standing in the hollow beside the chariot, the two, looking not like dwellers in Asgard, but like men traveling through the country, knocked at the door of the hut and asked for food and shelter. They could have shelter, the peasant and his wife told them, but they could not have food. There was little in that place, and what little there had been they had eaten for summer. The peasant showed them the inside of the hut. It was poor and threadbare, and there was nothing there to give anyone. In the morning, the peasant said he would go down to the river and catch some fish for a meal. "We can't wait until morning, we must eat now," said Thor, "and I think I can provide a good meal for us all." He went over to where his goats stood in the hollow beside the chariot of brass, and striking them with his hammer, he left them lifeless on the ground. He skinned the goats then, and taking up the bones very carefully, he left them down on the skins. The skins and bones he lifted up, then bringing them into the house, he left them in a hole above the peasant's fireplace. "No one," said he in a commanding voice, "must touch the bones that I leave here." Then he brought the meat into the house. Soon it was cooked and laid smoking on the table. The peasant and his wife and his son sat round the board with Loki and Thor. They had not eaten plentifully for many days, and now the man and the woman fed themselves well. Thjalfi was the name of the peasant's son. He was a growing lad, and had an appetite that had not been satisfied for so long. While the meat was on the table and his father and mother had kept him going here and there, carrying water, putting logs on the fire, and holding a blazing stick so that those at the table might see to eat, there was not much left for him when he was able to sit down, for Thor and Loki had great appetites, and the lad's father and mother had eaten to make up for days of want. So Thjalfi got little out of that plentiful feast. When the meal was finished, they lay down on the benches. Thor, because he had made a long journey that day, slept very soundly. Thjalfi lay down on the bench too, but his thoughts were still upon food. When all were asleep, he thought he would take one of the bones that were in the skin above him and break it and gnaw at it. So in the dead of night, that lad stood up on the bench and took down the goat skins that Thor had left so carefully there. He took out a bone, broke it, and gnawed it for the marrow. Loki was awake and saw him do this, but he, relishing mischief as much as ever, did nothing to stop the lad. Thjalfi put the bone he had broken back into the skin, and left the skin back in the hole above the fireplace. Then he went to sleep on the bench. In the morning, as soon as as they were up, the first thing Thor did was to take the skin out of the hole. He carried them carefully out the hollows, where he had left the goats standing. He put each goat skin down with the bones in it. He struck each with his hammer, and the goats sprang up alive, horns and hoofs and all. But one was not as he had been before. He limped badly. Thor examined the leg and found out that one bone was broken. In terrible anger, he turned on the peasant, his wife, and his son. "A bone of this goat has been broken under your roof," he shouted. "For that I shall destroy your house and leave you all dead under it." The Elfie wept when he came forward and touched the knees of Thor. "I did not know what harm I did," he said. "I broke the bone." Thor had his hammer lifted up to crush him into the earth, but he could not bring it down upon the weeping boy. He let his hammer rest on the ground again. "You will have to do much service for me for having lamed my goat," he said. "Come with me." And so the lad Bjelfi went off with Thor and Loki. Thor took in his powerful hands the shafts of the chariot of brass, and he dragged it into a lonely mountain hollow where neither men nor giants came. And they left the goats in a great empty forest to stay resting there until Thor called to them again. Thor and Loki and the lad, the Elfie, went across from Midgard into Jotunheim. Because of Mjolnir, the great hammer that he carried, Thor felt safe in the realm of the giants, and Loki, who trusted his own cunning, felt safe too. The lad, the Elfie, trusted in Thor so much that he had no fear. They were long in making the journey, and while they were traveling, Thor and Loki trained the Elfie to be a quick and strong lad. One day they came out on a moor. All day they crossed it, and at night it still stretched far before them. A great wind was blowing, night was falling, and they saw no shelter near. In the dusk they saw a shape that looked to be a mountain, and they went toward it, hoping to find some shelter in a cave. Then Loki saw a lower shape that looked as if it might be a shelter. They walked around it, Loki and Thor and the lad, the Elfie. It was a house, but a house most oddly shaped. The entrance was a long, wide hall that had no doorway. When they entered this hall, they found 5 long and narrow chambers running off it. "It is an odd place, but it is the best shelter we can get," said Loki. "You and I, Thor, will take 2 longest rooms, and the lad, the Elfie, can take one of the little rooms." They entered their chambers and lay down to sleep. But from the mountain outside there came a noise that was like moaning forests and falling cataracts. The chamber where each one slept was shaken by the noise. Neither Thor nor Loki nor the lad Bjelfi slept that night. In the morning they left the 5-chambered house and turned their faces toward the mountain. It was not a mountain at all, but a giant. He was lying on the ground when they saw him, but just then he rolled over and sat up. Little men, he shouted to them. "Have you passed by a glove of mine on your way?" He stood up and looked all around him. "Oh, I see my glove now," he said. Thor and Loki and the lad Thjalfi stood still as the giant came toward them. They leaned over and picked up the 5-roomed shelter they had slept in. He then put it upon his hand. It really was his glove. Thor gripped his hammer, and Loki and the lad Thjalfi stood behind him, but the giant seemed good-humored enough. "Where might ye be bound for, little men?" he asked. "To Utgard in Jotunheim," Thor answered boldly. "Oh, to that place," said the giant. "Come, then, I shall be with ye for so far. You can call me Skyrmir." "Can you give us breakfast?" said Thor. He spoke crossly, for he did not want it to appear that there was any reason to be afraid of the giant. I can give you breakfast," said Skyrmir, "but I don't want to stop to eat now. We'll sit down as soon as I have an appetite. Come along now. Here is my wallet to carry. It has my provisions in it." He gave Thor his wallet. Thor put it on his back and put Thjalfi sitting up on it. On and on the giant strode, and Thor and Loki were barely able to keep up with him. It was midday before he showed any signs of halting to take breakfast. They came to an enormous tree. Under it, Skyrmir sat down. "I'll sleep before I eat," he said, "but you can open my wallet, my little men, and make your meal out of it." Saying this, he stretched himself out, and in a few minutes Thor and Loki and the lad Thjalfi heard the same sounds as kept them awake the night before, the sounds that were like forests moaning and cataracts falling. It was the sound of Skyrmir snoring. Thor and Loki and the lad Thjalfi were too hungry now to be disturbed by those tremendous noises. Thor tried to open the wallet, but he found it was not easy to undo the knots. Then Loki tried to open it. In spite of all of Loki's cunning, he could not undo the knots. Then Thor took the wallet from him and tried to break the knots by main strength, but not even the strength of Thor could break them. He threw the wallet down in his rage. The snoring of Skyrmir became louder and louder. Thor stood up in his rage. He grasped Mjolnir and flung it at the head of the sleeping giant. The hammer struck him on the head, but Skyrmir only stirred in his sleep. "Did a leaf fall on my head?" he asked. He turned round on the other side and went back to sleep. The hammer came back to Thor's hand. As soon as Skyrmir snored, he flung it again, aiming at the giant's forehead. The hammer struck there. Then the giant opened his eyes. "Has an acorn fallen on my forehead?" he said. Again he went back to sleep, but now Thor, terribly roused, stood over his head with the hammer held in his hands, and he struck him dead on the forehead. It was the greatest blow that Thor had ever dealt. "A bird is pecking at my forehead. There's no chance to sleep here," said Skyrmir, sitting up. "And you, little men, did you not have breakfast yet? Toss over my wallet to me, and I shall give you some provision." The lad Thjalfi brought him the wallet. Skyrmir opened it, took out his provisions and gave a share to Thor and Loki and the lad Thialfi. Thor would not take a provision from him, but Loki and the lad Thialfi took it and ate. When the meal was finished, Skirmir rose up and said, "Now it is time for us to go towards Utgard." As they went on their way, Skirmir turned to Loki. "I always feel very small when I go to Utgard," he said. "You see, I am such a small and weak fellow, and the folks who live there are so big and powerful. But you and your friends will be welcome in Utgard. They will be sure to make little pets of you." And then he left them, and they went to Utgard, the city of the giants. Giants were going up and down the streets. They were not so huge as Skirmir would have them believe, Loki noticed. Utgard was the Asgard of the giants, but in its buildings there was not a line of the beauty that there was in the palaces of the gods, Gladsheim and Bridbalbik or Finslayer. Huge but shapeless, the buildings arose like mountains or icebergs. Oh, beautiful Asgard with the dome above it of the deepest blue. Asgard with the clouds around it, heaped up like mountains of diamonds. Asgard with its rainbow bridge and its glittering gates. Oh, beautiful Asgard, could it be indeed that these giants would one day overthrow you? Thor and Loki with the lad Thialfi went to the palace of the king. The hammer that Thor gripped would, they knew, make them safe even there. They passed between rows of giants, guards, and came to the king's seat. "We know you, Thor and Loki," said the giant king, "and we know that Thor has come to Utgard to try his strength against the giants. We shall have a contest tomorrow. Today there will be bar sports for our boys. If your young servant would like to try his swiftness against our youths, let him enter the race today." Now Thialfi was the best runner in Midgard, and all the time he had been with them, Loki and Thor had trained him in his quickness, and so Thialfi was not fearful of racing against the giant's youths. The giant called on one named Hugi, placed him against Thialfi. The pairs started together. Thialfi then sprinted off ahead. Loki and Thor watched the race anxiously, for they thought it would be well for them if they had a triumph over the dwellers in Utgard in the first contest. But they saw Hugi leave Thialfi behind. They saw the giant youth reach the winning post, circle around it, and come back to the starting place before Thialfi reached the end of the course. Thialfi, who did not know how it was that he had been beaten, asked that he be let run the race with Hugi again. The pair started off once more, and this time it did not seem to Thor and Loki that Hugi had left the starting place at all. He was back there almost as soon as the race had started. They came back from the racing ground to the palace. The giant king and his friends, with Thor and Loki, sat down to the supper table. "Tomorrow," said the king, "we shall have a great contest when Asa Thor will show us his power. Have you of Asgard ever heard of one who would enter a contest in eating? We might have a contest in eating at this supper board if we could get one who would match himself with Loki here. He can eat more than anyone in Jotunheim." "And I," said Loki, "can eat more than any two in Jotunheim. I will match myself against your Loki." "Good," said the Giant King, and all the giants present said good. This will be a sight worth seeing. Then they put scores of plates along one side of the table, each plate filled with meat. Loki began at one end, and Loki began at the other. They started to eat, moving toward each other at each cleared plate. Plate after plate was emptied, and Thor, standing by with the giants, was amazed to see how much Loki ate. But Loki, on the other hand, was leaving plate after plate emptied. At last, the two stood together. Let me finish my sentence. At last, the two stood together with scores of plates on either side of them. "He has not defeated me," cried Loki. "I have cleared as many plates as your..." "But you have not cleared them so well," said the king. "Loki has eaten all the meat that was upon them," said Thor. "But Loki has eaten the bones with the meat," said the Giant King. "Look and see if it be not so." Thor went to the plates. Where Loki had eaten, the bones were left on the plates. Where Loki had eaten, nothing was left. Bones as well as meat were consumed, and all the plates were left bare. "We are beaten," said Thor to Loki. "Tomorrow, Thor," said Loki, "you must show all your strength, or the giants will cease to dread the might of the dwellers in Asgard." "Be not afraid," said Thor. "No one in Jotunheim will triumph over me." The next day, Thor and Loki came into the great hall of Utgard. The Giant King was there with a throng of his friends. Thor marched into the hall with Mjolnir, his great hammer, in his hands. "Our young men have been drinking out of this horn," said the king, "and they want to know if you, as a Thor, would drink out of it a morning draught. But I must tell you that they think that no one of the Aesir could empty the horn at one draught." "Give it to me," said Thor. "There is no horn you can hand me that I cannot empty at a draught." A great horn, brimming and overflowing, was brought over to him. Handing Mjolnir to Loki and bidding him stand so that he might keep the hammer in sight, Thor raised the horn to his mouth. He drank and drank. He felt sure there was not a drop left in the horn as he laid it on the ground. "There," he said, "your giant horn is drained." The giants looked within the horn and laughed. "Drained, Asathor," said the Giant King. "Look into the horn once again. You have hardly drunk below the brim." And Thor looked into it and saw that the horn was not half emptied. In a mighty rage he lifted it to his lips again. He drank and he drank and he drank. Then, satisfied that he had emptied it to the bottom, he left the horn on the ground and walked over to the other side of the hall. "Thor thinks he has drained the horn," said one of the giants, lifting it up. "But see, friends, see what remains in it." Thor strode back and looked again into the horn. It was still half filled. He turned round to see all the giants were laughing at him. "Asathor, Asathor," said the Giant King. "We know not how you are going to deal with us in the next feat, but you certainly are not able to drink against the giants." Said to Thor, "I can lift up and set down any being in your hall." As he said this, a great iron-clad cat bounded into the hall stood before Thor, her back arched and her fur bristling. "Then lift the cat off the ground," said the giant king. Thor strode to the cat, determined to lift her up and fling her amongst the mocking giants. He put his hands to the cat, but he could not raise her up. Up and up went Thor's arms, up and up, high as they could go. The cat arched back, went up to the roof, but her feet were never taken off the ground. And as he heaved and heaved with all his might, he heard the laughter of the giants all around him. Thor turned away, his eyes flaming with anger. "I am not wont to try to lift cats," he said. "Bring me one to wrestle with, and I swear you shall see me overthrow him." "Here is one for you to wrestle with, Asser Thor," said the king. Thor looked round and saw an old woman hobbling toward him. She was blear-eyed and toothless. "This here is Ellie, my ancient nurse," said the giant king. "She is the one we would have you wrestle with." "Thor does not wrestle with old women. I will lay my hands on your tallest giants instead." "Ellie has come where you are," said the giant king. "Now it is she who will lay hands upon you." The old woman hobbled toward Thor, her eyes gleaming under her falling fringes of gray hair. Thor stood unable to move as the hag came toward him. She laid her hands upon his arms. Her feet began to trip at his. He tried to cast her from him. Then he found that her feet and her hands were as strong against his head as bare bands and sticks of iron. Then they began a wrestling match in earnest between Thor and the ancient crone Ellie. Round and round the hall they wrestled, and Thor was not able to bend the old woman backward nor sideways. Instead, he became less and less able under her terrible grasp. She forced him down, and at last he could only save himself from being left prone on the ground by throwing himself down on one knee and holding the hag by the shoulders. She tried to force him down on the ground, but she could not do that. Then she broke from him, hobbled to the door, and went out of the hall. Thor rose up and took the hammer from Loki's hands. Without a word, he went out of the hall and along the ways and toward the gate of the giant city. He spoke no word to Loki nor to the lad Thjalfi, who went with him for the 7 weeks that they journeyed through Jotunheim. How Thor and Loki befooled Thrym the giant. Loki told another tale about Thor and Thrym, a stupid giant who had cunning streaks in him. Loki and Thor had been in this giant's house. He had made a feast for them, and Thor had been unwatchful. Then, when they were far from Jotunheim, Thor missed Mjolnir, missed the hammer that was in the defense of Asgard and the help of the gods. He could not remember how or where he had mislaid it. Loki's thoughts went toward Thrym, that stupid giant who yet had cunning streaks in him. Thor, who had lost the hammer that he had sworn never to get out of his sight, did not know what to do. But Loki thought it would be worthwhile to see if Thrym knew anything about it. He went first to Asgard. He hurried across the rainbow bridge and passed Heimdall without speaking to him. To none of the dwellers in Asgard whom he met did he dare relate the tidings of Thor's loss. He spoke to none until he came to Frigga's palace. To Frigga he said, "You must lend me your falcon dress until I fly to Thrym's dwelling and find out if he knows where Mjolnir is. If every feather was silver, I would give it to you to go on such an errand," Frigga said. So Loki put on the falcon dress and flew to Jotunheim and came near Thrym's dwelling. He found the giant upon a hillside, putting golden and silver collars upon the necks of his hounds. Loki, in the plumage of a falcon, perched on the rock above him, watching the giant with falcon eyes. And while he was there, he heard the giant speak boastful words. "I put collars of silver and gold on you now, my hounds," said he, "but soon we giants will have the gold of Asgard to deck our harps and our steeds, yea, even the necklace of Freya to put upon you the best of my hounds. For Mjolnir, the defense of Asgard, is in Thrym's holding." Then Loki spoke to him. "Yea, we know that Mjolnir is in thy possession, O Thrym," said he, "but now know thou that the eyes of the watchful gods are upon thee." "Ah, Loki, shape-changer," said Thrym, "you are there, but all your watching will not help me to find Mjolnir. I have buried Thor's hammer 8 miles deep in the earth. Find it if you can. It is below the caves of the dwarves." "It is useless for us to search for Thor's hammer," said Loki. "Eh, Thrym?" "It is useless for you to search for it," said the giant sulkily. "But what recompense would you gain if you restored Thor's hammer to the dwellers in Asgard?" said Loki. "No, good Loki, I will never restore it, not for any recompense," said Thrym. "Yet bethink thee, Thrym," said Loki. "There is naught in Asgard you would like to own. No treasure, no possession, Odin's ring, or Frey's ship, Skipaldanir." No, said Thrym. "Only one thing could the dwellers in Asgard offer me that I would take in exchange for Mjolnir, Thor's hammer." "And what would that be, Thrym?" said Loki, flying towards him. "She whom many giants have striven to gain, Freya, for my wife," said Thrym. Loki watched Thrym for long with his falcon eyes. He saw that the giant would not alter his demand. "I will tell the dwellers in Asgard of your demand," he said at last, and he flew away. Loki knew that the dwellers in Asgard would never let Freya be taken from them to become the wife of Thrym, the stupidest of the giants. He flew back. By this time all the dwellers in Asgard had heard of the loss of Mjolnir, the help of the gods. Heimdall shouted to him as he crossed the rainbow bridge to ask what tidings he brought back, but Loki did not stop to speak to the warden of the bridge, but went straight to the hall where the gods sat in council. To the Aesir and the Vanir he told Thrym's demand. None would agree to let the beautiful Freya go live in Jotunheim as the wife of the stupidest of the giants. All in the council were cast down. The gods would never again be able to help mortal men, for now that Mjolnir was in the giants' hands, all their strength would have to be used in the defense of Asgard. So they sat in the council with looks downcast, but cunning Loki said, "I have thought of a trick that may win back the hammer from stupid Thrym. Let us pretend to send Freya to Jotunheim as a bride for him, but let one of the gods go in Freya's veil and dress. Which of the gods would bring himself to do so shameful a thing said those in the council. Oh, he who lost the hammer, Thor, should be prepared to do as much to win it back, said Loki. Thor, let Thor win back the hammer from Thrym by Loki's trick, said the Aesir and the Vanir. They left it to Loki to arrange how Thor should go to Jotunheim as a bride for Thrym. Loki left the council of the gods and came to where he had left Thor. There is but one way to win the hammer back, Thor, he said, and the gods in council have decreed that you shall take it. What is the way? Said Thor. But no matter what it is, tell me of it, and I shall do it as thou dost say. Then, said laughing Loki, I am to take you to Jotunheim as a bride for Thrym. Thou art to go in a bridal dress and veil as Freya's veil and bridal dress. What? I'm dressed in women's garb, shouted Thor. Yea, Thor, and a veil over your head, and garlands of flowers upon it. I wear a garland of flowers, and rings upon thy fingers, and a bunch of housekeeper's keys in thy girdle. Cease thy mockery, Loki, said Thor roughly, or I shall shake thee. It is no mockery. Thou wilt have to do this to win Mjolnir back for the defense of Asgard. Thrym will not take other recompense except Freya. I would mock him by bringing thee to him in Freya's veil and dress. When thou art in his hall, and he asks thee to join hands with him, say thou wilt not until he puts Mjolnir into thy hands. Then, when thy mighty hammer is in thy holding, thou canst deal with him and with all in his hall, and I shall be with thee as thy bridesmaid, O sweet, sweet maiden Thor. Loki, said Thor, thou didst devise all this to mock me. I in a bridal dress, I with a bride's veil upon me. The dwellers in Asgard will never cease to laugh at me. Yea, said Loki, but there will never be laughter again in Asgard unless thou art able to bring back the hammer that thine unwatchfulness lost. True, said Thor unhappily. And is this, thinkest thou, Loki, the only way to win back Mjolnir from Thrym? It is the only way, O Thor, said the cunning Loki. So Thor and Loki set out for Jotunheim and the dwelling of Thrym. A messenger had gone before them to tell Thrym that Freya was coming with her bridesmaid, and that the wedding feast was to be prepared and the guests gathered, and that Mjolnir was to be at hand so that it might be given over to the dwellers in Asgard. Thrym and his giant mother hastened to have everything in readiness. Thor and Loki came to the giant's house in the dress of a bride and a bridesmaid. A veil was over Thor's head, hiding his beard and his fierce eyes. A red embroidered robe he wore, and at his side hung a girdle of housekeeper's keys. Loki was also veiled. The hall of Thrym's great house was swept and garnished, and great tables were laid for the feast. And Thrym's mother was going from one guest to another, vaunting that her son was getting one of the most beauteous dwellers in Asgard for his bride, Freya, whom so many of the giants had tried to win. When Thor and Loki stepped across the threshold, Thrym went to welcome them. He wanted to raise the veil of his bride and give her a kiss. Loki quickly laid his hand on the giant's shoulder. Forbear, he whispered. Do not raise her veil. We dwellers in Asgard are reserved and bashful. Freya would be much offended to be kissed before this company. Aye, aye, said Thrym's old mother. Do not raise thy bride's veil, son. These dwellers in Asgard are more refined in their ways than we, the giants. Then the old woman took Thor by the hand and led him to the table. The size and the girth of the bride did not surprise the huge giants who were in the wedding company. They stared at Thor and Loki, but they could see nothing of their faces and little of their forms because of their veils. Thor sat at the table with Thrym on one side of him and Loki on the other. Then the feast began. Thor, not noticing that what he did was unbecoming to a refined maiden, ate salmon right away. Loki nudged him underneath, pressed his foot, but he did not heed Loki. After the salmon, he ate a whole oxen. These maids of Asgard, said the giants to each other, they may be refined, as Thrym's mother says, but their appetites are lusty enough. No wonder she eats, poor thing, said Loki to Thrym. It is 8 days since we left Asgard, and Freya never ate on the way, so anxious was she to see Thrym and to come to his house. Poor darling, said the giant. What she has eaten is little after all. Thor nodded his head toward the mead vat. Thrym ordered his servants to bring a measure to his bride. The servants were kept coming with measures to Thor, while the giants watched and while Loki nudged and nodded. Thor drank 3 barrels of mead. Oh, said the giants to Thrym's mother, we are not so sorry that we failed to win a bride from Asgard. And now a piece of the veil slipped aside, and Thor's eyes were seen for an instant. Oh, how does it come that Freya has such glaring eyes? Said Thrym. Poor thing, said Loki. No wonder her eyes are glaring and staring. She has not slept for 8 nights. So anxious was she to come to you into your house, Thrym. But now the time has come for you to join hands with your bride. First put into her hands the hammer of Mjolnir, that she may know the great recompense that the giants have given for her coming. Then Thrym, the stupidest of the giants, rose up and brought Mjolnir, the defense of Asgard, into the feasting hall. Thor could hardly restrain himself from springing up and seizing it from the giant, but Loki was able to keep him still. Thrym brought over the hammer and put the handle into the hands of her whom he thought was his bride. Thor's hands closed on his hammer. Instantly he stood up. The veil fell off of him. His countenance and his blazing eyes were seen by all. He struck one blow on the wall of the house. Down it crashed. Then Thor went striding out of the ruin with Loki beside him, while within the giants bellowed as the roof and walls fell down upon them. And so was Mjolnir, the defense of Asgard, lost and won back. Oh, I'm getting a bit tired. I think I might end us there. I know we only have 6 minutes left, but I don't want to start another one without, with stopping in the middle. So we're gonna stop there. And I'm going to find someone to read out to. Bear with me a moment. thank you again for coming and sitting with us. I really do appreciate it. I'm about to do a very large move to another state about 1,300 miles away, so I'm not entirely sure when I'm going to be able to do another broadcast. I'm a little nervous, honestly, but I hope that when I get back that everybody will be excited for more stories. I'm hopeful that things will go well. Right then. Let's see. Okay. I want to once again thank you so much for joining me. Make sure to take your meds. Take a big sip of water. If you haven't had a chance, make sure to go outside and take a good heavy breath of fresh air. And if you have a furry loved one, make sure to give them a kiss on the forehead from me. If you're watching this on YouTube or on Twitch, I hope you'll drop a like and a follow, or a sub if you're able. And maybe comment if you can, anything to appease the gods of the algorithm. And I hope that you have a lovely night. Rest well. Sleep sweet. And I'll see you again very soon.